Heroes. I'm excited today to have Marc Cortez. He's with Liquidate, and Liquidate is a marketplace for buying water conservation credits, specifically for companies looking to zero out their water footprint. And Marc's going to talk more about that today. We're excited, Marc, to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Excited to talk about it.
Hey, so you told me that you went through sort of an incubator with Liquidate, and a lot of people wonder what that process is like. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, so I applied to, I'm here in California, and so they have regional versions of this, but it's called the Clean Tech Open, and you can just look it up, Clean Tech Open. They have facilities all across the country, and it's not really a contest, but you apply to it, and it costs a little bit of money, but it's an incubator, and it's about I want to say a 12-week incubator, because lots of people have ideas, but man, you need to flesh it out, and that's the whole process. And nothing, I always joke, no idea survives first contact with the customer, and so that's what this helps you do. Could be the greatest idea. You can see the whiteboard behind me. You get up there and draw it, and everyone goes ooh and ah. And then as soon as you ask someone for money, they go, well, it's not that great of an idea, right? So something like the Clean Tech Open or an incubator in general, it just allows you to put it all up there on a whiteboard and flesh it out. If there's a process that you go through, this thing called the business model canvas, which is really 9 different areas about a business that you need to think about. If you haven't thought about them, it's really obvious, and then you need to spend time thinking about it. But what they also do is put you in touch with a mentor, and a mentor has no skin in the game, so they tell you from a customer's perspective whether or not where the holes are, and where where you need to work and where you need to spend some time. So it's a very hands-on process. Great organization, and anyone who's got an idea in the clean tech space, I would recommend looking into it, because it's you get a lot of good resources, you get a lot of really smart people looking at it. And look, as I always say, a quick yes is fantastic. A quick no is also pretty fantastic, and a long maybe is just death, right? It's just like dying from 1,000 paper cuts. So this gets you, it will tell you all of those. It will tell you what's your quick yes, what's your quick no's, what do you need to work on, and by the end of the process, you either have something that you think you could take forward, or it just dies. And a startup that dies before you spend too much money and effort on it is fine. And so this survived the process. My company survived the process, and I was more convinced ever that there was a market for this. And so, very valuable thing to participate in.
No, for sure. And that is a great way of looking at it. You don't want to waste a lot of time on a startup, because time is sometimes worth more than money, because you could move on to something else that would work. That's called the pivot. And so I think getting that no makes a lot of sense. When you were going into that incubator, you probably had some preconceived notions. What was the biggest thing that you took away from that was completely different, or a total surprise to you from when you went into it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the things that they do, and anyone who gets an idea and then you get the opportunity to stand in front of investors, that in and of itself is an interesting process, and it's very rewarding. But I think that was part of the process that it didn't surprise me, because I've been through that before, but it's always enlightening. So for me, I come from an energy background. I was in the solar energy storage, early days of EV infrastructure. So worked a lot with investors in those ecosystems. My takeaway going into this venture was, hey, water's energy, right? It's sort of energy, and certainly we use a lot of energy to move water around. So I thought that investors would be into that and would be the same investors. And what I found out was completely different type of investors. I went back to the same people that I had gone to before. They're like, yeah, we don't do water. And so very eye-opening for me. Water is a very specific thing, even though it's super important, which is a real big takeaway for me. So that was the first thing. The second thing was, anytime you deal with investors, is there's a language that they have their own language, and it's not just valuations and different seed rounds and things like that. early stage means something different to everybody. And so, and the target is continually moving. So I can't tell you how many conversations I had say, well, I'm an early stage investor, and we typically, will invest a couple $1 million in early stage ideas. So you get into it, and then what they really mean is, no, I'm an early stage growth investor. In other words, you have to have a product, you have to have customers, you have to have revenue, and all the risks have to be gone, right? And so that's a continual moving target, and you just have to ask those questions. One of the takeaways and working with all investors is be real specific about what they invest in and what they don't invest in, because otherwise you're going to spend hours. This investor was talking to 50, 100 early stage companies that had no revenue and no product, right? So for him to say we're an early stage investor but you need a product and you need customers and you need revenue, we're all like, well, then what are we doing here? Now it's just an exercise in academia, really. And so those were a couple of big things. Anytime if you want to really test your idea, go talk to people with the money, and you'll walk away enlightened either way.
No, for sure. That was a huge takeaway for me as well. When I first went out and tried to raise money, was just, you think as an entrepreneur, you think, hey, if it's a good way, if it's a good investment, I'm going to do it. Right. But a lot of the investors are using other people's money. They have things called limited partners. Right. And so they have to fit into a certain box, and they can't say, oh, this is a great opportunity, but it's outside of my zone. I can just pull the trigger on it. They're sort of stuck having to only invest in the things that fit their mandate. So it's definitely a big learning process, just finding the right investor and realizing how many of them there are out there. Did you ultimately get funded from that incubator, or was it?
I didn't. What actually came out of the incubator was just I needed to do some more customer development work and really get. The good news is it really hones down your value proposition. And so when I look back now at some of my investor pitches, I'm kind of like, pretty lukewarm, and it just wasn't ready. That's a big part of it. So I didn't. We did a friends and family round to get it to the next phase, and so that'll be my next step of the company. But that's again, investors are mirrors, and you hear your story coming back at you. So if they're confused, it's because you confused them. And so in my case, I was like, okay, I need to really hone in on what the customer would look like and what they would want out of something like this.
Yeah, for sure. With technical products, that's one of the biggest things. You always say you confuse, you lose. And with technical stuff, it's really hard to simplify it and get it to a way that it can be digested. So does that mean, are you guys actively out there looking for, say, a seed stage round of funding, or are you guys still in, let's say, development mode before you go back into the market?
Yeah, I think August is when we'll take our next round. We're in development of our initial. It's not quite our minimal selling product, sellable product, but it's something. I got warm leads right in the sales game. So you talk to a bunch of customers and they go, hey, I'm interested. Show me, and then thud, the crickets chirp. Right, if you don't have a product, especially in the software game. So that was also a lesson I learned. My first really foray into a software service. So got to show it. And so that's what I'm doing. So by August, I'll have that. I can go back to the customers that I've talked to in the past and really have them start to kick the tires on this at the same time we go look for our next round of funding.
No, super cool. And who are those customers? When you say, I imagine you're a marketplace, so you're having to bring together, is it water credits and match those up with, say, corporate buyers that are looking to zero out their water footprint, or who are your customers that you're going after?
Yeah, the customer I pick on is a company like Coca-Cola, right? So companies, large public companies have very visible public water neutral goals. Coca-Cola in their annual report says for every gallon of water that they use, they give one back. So our net, we're net zero. Well, great to say, impossible to implement, right? So your options are, I can go find new sources of water. Good luck. I can restore watersheds, super expensive. I can replace all of my infrastructure in all of my facilities to do lower flow meters and things like that. But hey, guess what? As the sustainability directors will tell you, you can't conserve your way to zero. I mean, honestly, we make water, right? We sell water. How do we not use water? So, and then the kicker, of course, is your supply chain, right? You can't do anything about your supply chain. By the time all your components show up on your doorstep, they have embedded water, embedded energy, and you can't do anything about that. So it's a great public goal, but you can't get there. And so, so Coca-Cola beverage companies, Ford, GM, they have these big, we're going to be water neutral, just like everybody wants to be energy neutral these days. So I love it when the CEOs stand up and say that in public at their quarterly meetings. Then they hand that over to the sustainability directors, and they just go, "Oh man, how am I going to do it? I can't do it, right? It's an impossible goal." So this can help them with that. And so, so it really is a two-sided market. On one side, we are working with companies and later homeowners, but we're starting with businesses who have water saving measures in place. They have automatic meters that pull the water data, and they know exactly how much they use. So we can baseline their water usage. We put it through an algorithm to calculate their water savings, and then we do a process of validation where we have a third-party agency basically audit it to make sure that it's actually legit. And when they give it the thumbs up, then it goes into the marketplace. So there's a conversion process that happens. And so if you're a buyer, you go in there and it looks just like Amazon, something very similar. You go, hey, I need to offset 1 million gallons of water over the next quarter, and here's the 20 different sites and the amount of gallons that are available for sale that I can take credit for. And it's just a transaction at that point.
Yeah, it makes total sense. What would you say is a big mistake that other companies or that other people have made in trying to capture this water credit market? It's something that you guys have addressed and are doing a little bit different.
The water credit market is hugely different, as I alluded to earlier, in the sense, and normally with water, it's a physical thing. And so whenever you have a conversation about water, the first thing someone says is, well, who owns the water rights, right? So it goes back to the 1800s and cowboys and guns and stuff, right? Like, no, that's my mountain and that's my water. So this is different. And so we modeled it after the carbon market. So this is not rocket science here. People are actively trading voluntarily carbon credits, basically, to say it in a blunt way, the right to pollute. And I know it sounds kind of funny. There's a regulatory market, that's a very big one, but also the voluntary market. So General Motors, for example, is the largest buyer of voluntary carbon credits. So we modeled it after that. And I think one of the things that we found in investigating this was there's a potential for fraud. So what is a carbon credit? Is it as big as a Volkswagen? Right? So you have to make it tangible. And so sometimes people would buy or sell, carbon credits 4 and 5 times. And so one of the things we did was, number one, we're pulling the data off of meters itself. So you can literally see with data that water was saved. So we're not making any of that up. In fact, we're pulling the data off of, we're data agnostic. We pull the data and then we make some calculations based on other data. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we're just transparent about it. We're not hiding anything. These are real savings. You can see it, you can validate it, you can point to the building that saved it, you can see their water meter, you can see the data. So we just want to be transparent. But I think the biggest thing is you don't have to take our word for it. We want another agency, the same groups that certify green renewable energy, credits and certificates like that, something akin to that's going to come in and say, well, we've looked at the savings, we analyze their calculation, yes, it's valid, and then they click it and then it goes into the database. So we're at least hands off from gathering the data, but also validating it for the customer. So when the customer sees it, they have a good assurance that this is real and that it's not greenwashing, because that's the big
cool. You've got to have the transparency. If you don't have transparency, what do you really have?
Yeah,
that makes total sense. So has there been any sort of blockchain or any of this stuff? We've interviewed people in the carbon credits market, and we hear people thinking about trying to bring blockchain to bear because of the transparency. And then I'll say I was in a debate on LinkedIn today. Somebody basically saying, "Nah, the blockchain's a waste of time for this." And for me, I'm kind of, I don't know enough to know, but I'm hearing a lot of conversation around it.
Yeah, and so early on, blockchain is actually made for this. So, and I think blockchain is another of my experiences with this. I actually wrote a white paper. I thought blockchain is a secure computer protocol that is all about transparency and hands-off transaction. It's literally built for this. And I found an Ethereum-based platform that could enable it. I wrote a white paper about it, and one of my initial concept was, hey, we're bringing blockchain to the water conservation market, right? So sounds awesome. It's a great soundbite, but here's what happens, and you probably experienced this. Boy, you walk into a room of investors and you start talking to them about your idea, and then boom, here's the punchline, and it's blockchain, and then it becomes blockchain. Blockchain sucks all the air out of the room, and even though it's a perfect fit and it's a perfect technical enabler for this, you walked in talking about water conservation, and you're walking out talking only about blockchain. And so
you went from being a fintech company or being an energy company, being a water company, or being a clean tech company to being a fintech company all of a sudden. Yeah. And then they can't invest in you anymore.
Yeah. So I just was like, at the end, it's almost like at the end when you're walking out, they go, so what are you selling again? I'm like, all right, missed the point. So I backed it out of that. I say, look, I think blockchain is actually a perfect thing for this. And I actually even early stages invented my own coin, and we're going to do that whole thing as a way to perhaps fundraise. And I was like, no, that's just smoke and mirrors, in my opinion. It just was a distraction that I didn't like. Look, we're in California. Water conservation is a way of life, like it or not. It has to be real. It has to be tangible. There's a concept of additionality that is absolutely has to be true. You can't just wave your hands with it. And anyway, with my experience with blockchain was, it just took you down a rat hole that you just would never recover from. So it has perfect application for this, but I chose just not to do it.
Yeah, that's probably right. You can always build the company up and sell it one day and then let somebody else figure out that problem, I think.
Yeah, and as we're seeing with crypto right now, it's who the heck who knows what's going to happen with that, right? I have no idea, and I just this to me is such a logical extension of what we did in energy and renewable energy. It's valid. It's gonna be these types of financial, I call it financial engineering in the like we did in solar and renewables. It's absolutely going to happen in water. We're already seeing water being traded on the NASDAQ. There's water trading companies, so it's coming. It's going to be a foundational building block of the water market. So I don't want to distract from that. I think it's too important. We need it too much to be able to just blockchain it and have it get distracted with that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And the whole thing about blockchain is you've got to be able to have a stable coin that people can trust. I know there was a stable coin in the market recently. If I forget the name of it, I won't even try to say it because I don't want to get it wrong. But I know that the value of it collapsed, and it was supposed to be a stable coin. So until we get a stable coin that's really all about transparency and not about the value of the coin itself, I think it's going to be hard to bring that to bear. So who knows which one's going to be the winner? Maybe it's like the early days of search or something where there was 1,000 search engines, and then eventually we had Google. So it'll probably be like that. There's all these coins out there, and one of them will win, and who knows what it'll be. But once there is one, I think the principle of blockchain is amazing for transparency. The core point that you initially made was that we need transparency in these markets.
Yeah, and that's it literally is built for this. So I totally, which is why I was drawn to it. I was not at all an expert on it. I'm not at all now, but I learned enough to realize that the software protocol that's built and the process that gets used to extract the information from that chain as it moves around the chain, is made for this. This is exactly what it's for. So it's built for it. Unfortunately, it's also, laden with all the hype and the misdirection and, kind of who's in charge kind of thing. And so I just said, no, I'd rather focus on my core business.
Early days, right?
Yeah.
So let's transition into another topic. I heard you wrote a book. A little bird told me. Is that true?
Yeah. It's true. And, part of it, and it's the same thread, right? It's a quest for transparency. It's broader this time in the climate game because, and my book is called Climaturity, a journey into the muddy climate middle, because that's what it is. And so, boy, if you're anyone who's spent their time on the energy front, I sold my first product, solar product, in Northern Africa in 1999. So I've been around it for a while, and I've literally worked in every phase, off-grid now all the way through to large utility scale power plants. So, I've kicked a few solar modules in my day. Wonderful business, and it has made perfect sense. And in fact, I was one of the early true brand architects in the solar industry. So, boy, back in the day, we had the oil companies were the Goliath, we were David. We told the truth. We made good incremental progress. We took a lot of pride in it, and we told the truth, and we knew where our demons were and where our shortcomings were, and we just built the market. And so the industry that exists today was due in large part to many of those types of efforts. And then I don't know when it was, maybe 9 years ago or something like that, it morphed. And it turned into this crazy, just the twin towers, right? So you've got what I call on one side the climate deathers who are swearing we're going to be dead by Thursday because of the climate, and then the right is the climate deniers who just close the curtain like the Wizard of Oz and say, hey, there's nothing to see here. And most of us are somewhere in between. I worked in renewable, but I know the answers. I know what it's good at, and I know what it's not good at, So I started compiling stuff and really digging into and just researching it for my own interest and my own just understanding of what's going on with the climate. And it was enlightening, I think. And what I decided finally was like, man, both sides are wrong. All the sides are wrong, and no one knows what the truth is. We're not being
somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and look, the main consequences of 50 years of aggressive climate policy, you can, in whatever form you want to take, is we've got policies that are way too expensive that we can't get the country behind, and will have really small impacts on the climate if you do the math. And the second part, which is what I took really personally because I was working with my own kids and college students, was, we've just scared the heck out of the next generation of people. And so, I work with 20-year-old, 21, 22-year-old young adults getting into the workforce, and I'm teaching them at college, and invariably they talk about the climate, man, and they're just hopeless, and they literally think that they're going to die from climate change, and that their kids are, why have them? And as someone who really took a lot of pride in early solar messaging, I kept thinking, man, how did we fail so miserably as adults? How did we fail? How is that the message? This is not activism. This is just fear. And we invented a whole new mental disease to capture it called eco-anxiety, right? It's a real thing. So I decided to write this book saying, look, here's the questions I have about whatever the science is, and they're legitimate questions. Let's talk about future-looking predictive models and why that's different than empirical stuff that you can actually prove in a lab. Let's at least have that conversation, and let's not hide it behind international meeting minutes that no one ever reads. Okay, so let's have that conversation. Let's talk about the solutions that are being proposed, like electric vehicles. And when I do the math, I go, man, that's an awful lot of earth that we have to dig up to try to save us from digging up more earth, right? So, right, the solutions are hugely expensive. I love solar, but it's not going to save the planet. Sorry, it's just not. And I just know it. And so I started looking at the solutions, and I'm saying, there's a big gap there. Unfortunately, one of the things that most people don't like to hear, and I don't even like saying it, is the best thing that happened to the climate in the past 50 years is unfortunately COVID. because we cut our emissions by 11-15% in 1 year, what we haven't been able to do in 50 years. So that tells you that we're off base with a lot of this stuff. We don't need to spend $1 trillion or trillions of dollars to try to spin the earth backward on its axis with new technology. Go home, turn off your lights. You just saved, you just did what we haven't been able to do with 50 years of all this hysteria and craziness. So I wrote this book to try to say, look, most of us are somewhere in the middle. We want to have a rational discussion. We want transparency. I don't want to be told that X energy source is the cheapest and then realize that they're not telling us the entire paragraph of qualifiers behind this, because I know what they are. So I want us to all have the same things on the table in front of us. I want us to be able to look at it. I want a plan that both sides of the aisle can get behind, because most people are concerned about it. Most people realize that this is something that we have to be responsible for, and approach it with some pragmatism and the good old American spirit once we know what the heck the problem is. And so that's my long answer to your question, but I wrote a book called Climate Surge to try to begin that dialogue. So.
No, that's a great answer. And I'll tell you, we've got to solve the transparency issue, I think, on social media in order to solve this problem. Because what's happened is that all the things that are the most extreme get elevated to the top of the social media algorithms because they get the most clicks. So the way to solve it, both this problem and I think a lot of our problems, is if we could have somebody get in with the social media companies and bring them onto the same page of transparency around not elevating the thing that gets the most clicks to the top automatically, maybe having an algorithm that was a little smarter. I think we could solve both this problem and a lot of our other political problems that have sort of gravitated to the extreme now just because of views and clicks. It's crazy.
Yeah, I in my days where I'm super frustrated about some of this stuff, I will say, hey, here's a radical idea. Since the social media companies now are a big part of the climate problem because they own so much technology, how about we charge them for every account, and we'll just call it a carbon tax, right? We'll just charge them for every account, fake or otherwise. We don't even have to worry about it anymore. So if there's bot farms that are signing up millions of fake accounts, fine, we'll just charge them, and watch how quickly some of this stuff gets solved. I'm a firm believer. Oil companies, we may think that they're bad, but hey, guess what? We all use, I don't know one person in my life, anyone's life, who has stopped using fossil fuels. And so we need to use less of it. Yes, we need to conserve, of course, but it's not going anywhere. And the idea that honestly, you can't make a solar panel without lots of oil and gas. You can't make a windmill. You can't make any energy source or any electric vehicle without this sort of infrastructure. So we need it. So I'm not a big fan of demonizing, big oil companies for all the stuff that they've done in the past, because I just believe we need some rational minds to try to fold these things together and apply the technology where it needs to be.
Yeah, for sure. We absolutely have to work together on this stuff. So, hey, let's go back to the book thing. I know a lot of people would love to write a book. I hear that all the time. Could you walk me through sort of what that process was like? How did you get it published? How did you get it out there? Is it on Amazon?
Well, it started with me posting things probably once a week. I would find an article in the climate media or just the media that I would post on LinkedIn. So I started with LinkedIn, and then I started getting lots of feedback on that, both positive and negative. But what I got mostly was, hey, we need more information that is sort of down the middle, right? I don't need the bullhorn screaming at me, yelling at me why I'm doing things wrong, and I don't need other people just sitting there, no, not gonna, right? So we need actually some information from all different sides. So that kind of started going, and so I just started writing regularly, and next thing you know, I go, this actually is enough I'm starting to get enough for maybe a book, and there's actually a theme here, which is transparency and truth, and it's confusing, and so let's give ourselves permission to raise our hands and actually ask questions without other people screaming at us. So that's how it started. It was just I was writing and putting it out there and getting lots of feedback saying, hey, this is actually a really good approach to this. say more. So that's how it started. And then I just decided to, there were a bunch of holes that I needed to go fill in, which was just research the heck out of it. So go into, if you ever are having trouble sleeping, I suggest you go read the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, right? The IPCC, read their latest report. It's only, I think, 3,700 pages. I haven't read the whole thing, but man, that's some intense reading, right? So that's hard to digest. And so, I just started reading and understanding that, and some things got clarified, other things sort of went away, like this doesn't even make sense to me. And so that's when I started to compile that into a narrative that started to make sense. And then as far as the publishing, I published this myself, and so this is something I put on Amazon for no other reason than just the quickest path to get this story out there. I hired a consultant, basically a self-publishing consultant that just helped me through all the normal formatting and things like that and walked me through this. But he's also learning how to talk with folks like yourself and just get it out there and get the message out there. At the very least, my view is I sort of now have a blueprint for something that I feel important about, and it's based in research. And what I hope with the whole process is, I'm fine with being wrong. I hope it starts a dialogue and people say, hey, you missed this whole thing, and then opinions change. And to me, that's the way that we're going to solve this problem. So I think by putting it out there on Amazon and getting it out there and making it cheap, $10, and it's 120 pages, so it's not like you have to put on your scientific lab coat to get through it. I joke, I say it's part science, part satire, part snark. It's just an interesting read, I think, in a way to have this exact same conversation that we're having, which is, I'm fine with being wrong. I hope that a lot of us are wrong. I hope that a lot of us just start having this conversation and realize that we can actually solve this problem, or we can at least tackle it if we are able to just bridge these huge gaps that we have.
No, for sure, Mark. So can you say the full title of the book again so people can hit that up on Amazon?
Sure. It's called Climaturity, A Journey into the Muddy Climate Middle. I think if you, I picked muddy because, boy, if you dare step out in the middle, right, you're going to get, it's muddy there. It's not you don't do it because it's fun and breezy. You do it because you're in the search for some sort of truth. And I don't know that I have the truth by any means, but I also just felt like I wasn't getting the complete story from different things that I read. So Climaturity will get you to that place.
No, very cool. So everybody should go out and check that out on Amazon. And so to that point of getting to the truth, who's somebody that you'd like to meet that maybe not everybody's heard of that's really doing things or making a difference in this area?
Yeah, that's a good question. I steer away from the basics that you've probably heard, and because it's such a lightning rod. I'll tell you who I've read that have helped me with. There's a Danish economist called Bjorn Lomborg. He writes a lot in the Wall Street Journal. You've probably heard of them. I think he wrote a book called The Skeptical Environmentalist, and he's an economist. So I think the criticism against him has always been, well, you're not a scientist. Well, I'm like, well, most of us aren't, but we're still being handed the bill. So we sure as heck better understand it. So his whole take is, if you look at it from an economic perspective, the numbers are very different, right? Even in the worst case scenarios, the world's going to be able to adapt quite well. Thank you very much. And so Bjorn Lomborg is one. Michael Schellenberger, I know, California, but he's now going to be a candidate for governor, but a former hardcore environmental activist who's now pro-nuclear because he's done some similar looks at this. And that's also an interesting discussion, with all this energy replacement sort of thing. Is nuclear bad? And so he's got his own opinions about that, but he's now running against Gavin Newsom here. So he's got some interesting things. Roger Pilkey is a writer that has written quite a bit in Forbes, who has really looked into the political machinations of the IPCC. And I think Mr. Pilkey has taken lots of arrows for daring to wade into those political waters. So that's a dangerous place. So, I listen to them. John Stossel, the old 2020 guy, also has some videos and does some interesting work in the climate. And he basically has this exact conversation, and he's he's called out and said, "Hey, wait a sec. Well, I would love to sit there and have a discussion with Al Gore and some of the the real well-known climate activists and have an actual debate, but he can't get anyone to debate him." So, so this is interesting. So there's folks out there. I don't agree. Like most things, we don't agree with everything that different folks are saying, but I find it's a refreshing way to look at it, which is, boy, we need a dialogue. We need to be having some discussions about this because it's a big problem that we all need collectively to solve. So those are some of the voices that I've read.
No, that's really great, Mark. And it brings me back to an old show that was called Crossfire. I don't know if you remember that, but it was on CNN, and you'd have a Republican and a Democrat debate each other, and they'd yell and scream, but at the end they shook hands and walked away friends. I think we need a little bit more of that, both in the climate debate and throughout our politics today, where we can have differences of opinion, but we can still be friends and understand that there's a lot of shades of gray here, and people on the other side aren't necessarily bad people. They might just be misinformed, or maybe we're misinformed. You just never know.
Well, yeah, and I remember that show, and boy, I do kind of miss those days. But yeah, I don't know too many people who would disagree, who would just say, you know what, the climate's not a problem. Who cares? Who cares what we do with it, right? Let's just pollute. I don't know anyone like that. I really don't. And so I would bet that if you're sitting around having a glass of wine with someone, we can agree that it's a problem. Most people agree that it's a problem, that we need to take responsibility and be good environmental stewards. Who can argue with that? So the problem, I would bet that we can agree with. The question becomes, as always, who pays for it and whose fault is it, and X, Y, and Z. And so that's been the big challenge here. But I still think, and I continue, maybe it's naive hope, but I think by doing exactly what we're doing is the problem is, it's real. I'm not coming from a eyes wide shut perspective. Most people aren't. Most people agree on it. Most people think that we need to do something. But most people say to me, when they'll whisper it to me, they go, "I don't really know what to do," and right? And so I don't really know what to do. And that's a tough one. It's a big problem. It's affecting generations of people. But what the heck are we going to do about it? And that's the crux of this whole thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's going to take maybe a leader like a Kennedy that comes out with a moonshot and really unites everybody. Because I 100% agree that nobody wants to just do wrong by the planet. And even if you go back to your complete laissez-faire economics, right? I remember Econ 101, they taught us about negative externalities and the fact that, if the people that are contributing the negative externalities aren't paying for them, there's a problem. It's called the free rider problem. And I don't think anybody wants that. Everybody wants what's fair. I think we can all agree on fairness. And I think you're doing us something about it here by bringing transparency to a sector of the market, which is water, which is a big part of it. If we get that transparency, then you can allocate the costs to the parties they should be allocated to. I think that's half the battle.
Yeah, I think so too. Most people, transparency, I think and again, maybe it's a naive belief here, but I sort of believe if we are told the whole story and complete, we may not necessarily come to the same conclusion, but I would bet more times than not we would say, you know what, it's worth $5, not $5 trillion, but it's worth $5, and let's attack it here. Let's do this. And that's part of the hope, is certainly with what I'm doing in the water, but also with the book, is just a dialogue. It's a tool for dialogue. It's just, what do we solve? We can solve some of this stuff. There's things that we can do, and they're not necessarily that complicated. Like I said, I was joking sort of about turning the lights off, but not really, right? I mean, don't cut down that tree to put a factory that builds stuff that saves trees. Right? Keep the tree. Turn the lights off. Do the stuff that we know has worked and that can work, that we have some control over, and all that.
For sure, I agree, Mark. Hey, we're at about time here. What would you like to leave the audience with today that we didn't cover? And is there anything you'd like to do in terms of call to action for the audience?
Well, I'll underline this, is we got to continue to have the dialogue. Let's not be afraid of actually having this conversation for fear of someone else yelling at us. I know there's lots of pent up beliefs But this is how we're going to solve it because we're not making much product. Scared children that we put on magazine covers, it's just uncool from any perspective. That's not activism, that's fear. And we're causing it. We're the adults in the room. We have to stop causing that and lead us towards solutions. So hopefully something like financial mechanisms that save water that can help it and be transparent and show, big businesses, they can be part of the good too. I have no problem with that. We need their energy and their creativity and their resources to focus on this. And maybe a book like something I wrote, maybe it'll inspire a bunch of other people to write their own opinion, which is fantastic. We need all of our brains on this to help solve it. So research, dialogue, openness, transparency, I think that's what we need the most of in our future climate pursuits.
No, for sure, Mark. I completely agree. Mark, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today. This has been Marc Cortez with Liquidate, and they're a marketplace for buying water conservation credits. Mark's also written a book that you can check out on Amazon. Mark, we really appreciate having you on Energy Superheroes today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. And this is a big part of the solution, I think. So thank you.